Welcome to the Connections community. My name is Elizabeth Parks and I'm the president of Parks Associates, a market research and consulting firm focused on emerging consumer technologies. Since 1986, we've been looking closely at emerging products in the home for consumers, consumer devices and services like home security and automation, connected entertainment, connected health, and broadband services in the home. This year would have been our 24th year to host our signature event, Connections, the premier connected home conference. We would also be hosting our 15th annual Connections Europe event in November in Amsterdam. While it's an enormous disappointment that we can't host our in-person events this year, we know they play a huge role in networking, visibility for leading players in the smart home space, and interacting with our analyst team and key players. In place of these events, we're bringing you the Connections community, a virtual experience that will take place through the end of November. We will be live streaming our analysts, industry leaders, and hosting panel discussions through the SwapCard platform, where attendees can log in for live viewing, view past recorded sessions, and interact with fellow Connections community participants during our live sessions. We want to thank our sponsors of our events, many of whom have supported our efforts for years. We really are striving to bring individuals together to network and communicate about the important issues our industries are facing, particularly as we all navigate the new way to accomplish things. Our Connections community platform allows for a live stream view and conversations with our community members. You can ask questions, chat with the group, chat with individuals, and even have a video meeting spontaneously with community members. Following the session, we'll have open networking discussions on video for more dialogue with our analyst team and community members. We have already had some great sessions on the platform as part of the Connections community experience. If you're just joining us, or if you missed a previous session, you can go back on the agenda calendar to watch these on demand. We are excited about our upcoming sessions covering connected health at home on September 16th, the support of consumer devices and the network on October 7th, and privacy and security issues on October 28th. These virtual experiences lead up to 3 days of networking fun hosted November 10th through the 12th, where Parks Associates will present a state of the smart home market, the value in elevated user experiences, monitoring and expansion beyond security systems, smart home platforms, seniors and technology, and the impact of new technologies focused on proactive and predictive analytics, as well as the impact of 5G and Wi-Fi 6. We are proud to bring together over 1,000 executives so far, with more members joining daily. Our team looks forward to your feedback. For any comments or interest in learning more about visibility options or speaking, please reach out to me or any of our team members. Use the question tab to ask your questions or to upvote your favorite questions from other attendees. You can also answer polling questions under polls to give your live vote. Our analysts and panel speakers will be addressing your questions and the polling answers during the live stream. Ask your questions early in the presentation, as our analysts will choose the most upvoted questions to be addressed by the session speakers. If you have any questions during the stream about SwapCard, our team is standing by to help. Just drop a message in the chat or message one of Parks Associates team members via the Parks Associates company page. We want to make sure you're connecting with our industry-leading sponsors in the smart home space. You can visit any sponsor during the session by navigating to the Sponsors tab, browse sponsors, or bookmark the ones that interest you for later. Contact the sponsor via chat, view uploaded documents, watch welcome videos, and more. Have you created your personal event agenda on SwapCard? Go to the Agenda tab, view different sessions under each date, add the sessions that interest you to your personal event agenda. You can access your personal event agenda by clicking the My Event tab. Export your agenda to your calendar to receive reminders and a direct link to your registered sessions.
Good morning and welcome to our fourth virtual Connections community event. This one is focused on connected health at home, the next smart home market. I'm Jennifer Kent, Senior Director of Research at Parks Associates, and I'm so pleased to be leading this session and discussion today. Hopefully you know Parks Associates, you're familiar with us and what we do, who we are. Hopefully we've been able to engage with you at a previous virtual event or perhaps in previous years in our in-person events. But we are a market research and consulting firm focused on emerging consumer technology markets. For the past 10 years, we have looked at connected health solutions in the home, specifically at the opportunity to serve consumers at the home. And for 30 years, we've been covering home automation, residential security, technologies in the home and that serve consumers. We produce syndicated industry reports, market forecasts. We survey 10,000 consumers each quarter. And we serve over 500 companies with research and consulting each year. Like I said, this is our fourth Connections community event. We've come together already to talk about the MDU market, to talk about energy management and opportunities there. We've talked about connected cars, and today we're focusing in on connected health. We also have 4 other executive event series that we are conducting in a virtual format this year. Future of Video, focusing on the video services, pay TV, OTT markets, digital media, consumer electronics in the home. We have our Smart Energy Summit series, focusing specifically on energy management in the home and opportunities for utilities, energy providers, and other connected health home players. And also our Connected Health Summit, which we just completed the first week of September. We'll be bringing some of those learnings from that event into our session today. We could absolutely not have moved from in-person executive premium events to the virtual format that we're doing this year without the support of our sponsors. We are so grateful, appreciative for their support. So thank you all for what you're doing and helping us to continue these conversations and connecting with the community here in these events. We also have a variety of media organizations and industry organizations that support us as well. So thank you very much to all of our supporter organizations. Our agenda today, I'll kick off with some research of our own and some of our insights to really dive into what's happened this year in the connected health market. It's a very unique year, obviously, and health is at the forefront of all of our minds. What does that mean when we're thinking about it at home? Following my remarks, we'll be inviting Mark Francis with Electronic Caregiver to give a visionary insight talk. And then we'll have a full panel discussion with some of the leading voices in the industry. We have speakers from the Mayo Clinic, from Intermountain Healthcare, from Trapalo, and from Gadjian, who will all be joining us for a panel discussion today. Following that content, we will invite all of you to join us in some breakout networking discussions. So we have a few Zoom rooms set up. One discussion we'll be having about the building connected health solutions, and one focusing on productive partnerships and what does that really take to make partnerships work in this space. So please join us for those. The Zoom links are in the Swap Card platform, but they can be a little bit hard to find. So when we're ready to move over to the networking discussions, our team will post the Zoom links right into the chat bar. So if you joined us a little early, you may have seen the message from our president, Elizabeth Parks, who talked about some of the features of the virtual event platform, but it bears repeating. There are 3 tabs to the right of your screen: a chat tab, a Q&A tab, and a polling tab. And the Q&A tab, we invite you all to submit questions for our speakers to answer. We will be taking questions with all of our speakers today. So as you think of them, please add them in that questions tab. You can also upvote them, whatever questions that you'd like to see answered. In the chat tab, you can add your thoughts. You can ask questions to our team. and our team may have content back to you to share in that chat area, like those Zoom links. And then finally, in the polling tab, we have a few polling questions set up for today where we're interested in your perspective and how you're seeing the market. And so go ahead and explore those tabs, get your answers in on the polling questions, and we'll discuss those polling questions later in the panel talk. So with that, let's dive into our topic for today, which is connected health at home. Going into this year, connected health solutions were making progress across the board. Much of the technology foundation had been laid to close the gap between the facility and the home, and to empower consumers with the apps and insights and devices that they can use to manage their own fitness and wellness. We've seen a lot of innovation from vendors. We've seen a lot of health providers and health systems experimenting and trialing with different remote care, connected care, virtual care solutions, and seeing how it fits into their model and works for their providers and for their patients. And we've seen a start on consumer education about home was absolutely still at the periphery of healthcare and what we consider to be healthcare. The concept of patient-centric care still operationally means facility-centric. Most virtual use cases are for ad hoc urgent care type needs or ongoing treatment after a diagnosis, when a care plan is set in place for a relatively small targeted percent of the population. Proactive care, ongoing wellness, remote diagnosis, virtual monitoring of acute illness at home has really not been at the forefront of connected health yet. But COVID-19 is a sea change for sure. No matter where you sit in the ecosystem, health provider, health system, payer, vendor, consumer, we're seeing a new mindset starting to take hold where the home is a viable and a valid location for care delivery, care receipt, for health management generally. And we're seeing the use cases for connected health at home really broadening. From the provider and the health system point of view, connected and virtual health solutions have been invaluable during this pandemic. There have been limitations on non-essential services that can even be provided, and patients avoiding care either to avoid risk of exposure to themselves or risk them exposing others while in a facility. And so as a result, we've seen volume of care services plummet. The American Hospital Association estimates that hospitals in the United States will see about a $323 billion loss in 2020 alone. And so in response, health systems and physician practices have scaled their virtual care operations, with many physicians and other healthcare providers using virtual care for the very first time. And reimbursement changes from both commercial and government payers have made this possible. CMS expanded reimbursement for both telehealth and remote patient monitoring this year to cover more people in more places for more conditions than ever before. And commercial players have expanded their reimbursement of telehealth and have really invested in that consumer education about where their members can access virtual care services, how they do that, and what's available to them. At the same time, vendors across the telehealth, behavioral health, mental health spaces have scaled their operations to meet demand. This new growth is happening not only in the telehealth space, as I've been talking about, in remote patient monitoring, but also even the fitness and exercise space. So we saw gyms and fitness centers shut down across the country, forcing many small fitness businesses online and encouraging consumers to trial new online fitness services. So I'm showing here Beachbody On Demand. Beachbody, which is the provider of the popular Beachbody On Demand fitness service, reported 300% subscriber growth between March and May of 2020. So we are seeing this demand, this usage bloom across the board from our own consumer survey work. We know that in just 1 year, telehealth service use has nearly tripled. So last year, in Q2 of 2019, 15% of US broadband households reported using a telehealth service in the previous 12 months. In May of this year, that number had risen to 41%. And from all corners of the ecosystem, we are hearing that the connected health market has accelerated by at least 5 years. Now, when we look at from the perspective of the consumer at home and consider who will deliver various connected health solutions to the home, we see a rapidly expanding ecosystem of players at the table, each offering unique benefits. So from the traditional healthcare players, consumers recognize them clearly as care providers. There's a trust there that care providers, pharmacy services, home healthcare aides, right, that they are held accountable to high standards, that they are meant to be playing in this space and can deliver care. But deploying technology in the home, even health technology, is not necessarily their strong suit, and they're not necessarily built to operate this way. But service providers, home automation platforms, other home solution providers who already serve the consumer at home bring assets of their own, familiar brands, an established presence in the home, right? A deep understanding of the user experience, expertise onboarding users, so marketing to them, educating them on the value of a product or service, optimizing the purchase or acquisition process, how you get them into the service, and then deploying and actually distributing the product or service. Also, a lot of the home players have experience in consultative selling, which means that there's a model for understanding what matters to the whole family, or what is the layout of that particular home, what features are really needed for this person in this family, in this household, and which aren't, and adjusting based on that. And finally, providing ongoing support and having assets where consumers can call if they have a problem, the technology is not working, and how can they get it working again. So these providers include, again, home security service providers, MSOs, internet service providers, PERS system manufacturers and service providers, and PERS standing for Personal Emergency Response Service or Panic Button Emergency Care, and of course the tech giants. So the past 5 years, we have seen Amazon, Google, Apple, as well as others like Microsoft and Samsung developing their healthcare strategies. While the rest of the healthcare ecosystem is starting with a facility mindset and reaching into the home, these consumer technology companies are starting with the consumer and starting with the home and increasingly reaching into the healthcare space. And their ability to impact this space is really hard to overstate. So first, they have enormous user bases. Amazon has over 100 million Amazon Prime members. There are over 120 million Android users in the US alone, over 100 million iPhone users in the US alone. So they have the ability to scale and to cut out the middlemen across the healthcare ecosystem. All three have hardware plays, right? They have a consumer-facing wellness or fitness hardware, the Apple Watch. Google recently acquired Fitbit. And Amazon just this month announced its own fitness wearable called the Halo. All three have distinct software and services strategies. So Amazon focusing on pharmacy and cloud services and telehealth. There's an Amazon telehealth service for its own employees in the Seattle area. Google focusing on AI and analytics and what it can do in the healthcare system from an analytical standpoint. And Apple in providing a software platform to enable the next killer apps, whether focused on consumer, research, or healthcare applications. And just yesterday, Apple launched its Fitness Plus service, which is a personalized workout streaming service. Consumer tech companies are constantly expanding their feature sets and broadening the use cases that they can address. Just this week, Fitbit received a regulatory clearance from the FDA for its ECG app on its new Fitbit Sense wearable for use both in the US and the EU. Apple has had the ECG FDA cleared application as well in its smartwatch devices since 2018. And we're already hearing stories about users being notified of cardiac issues and then scheduling a follow-up with their care provider, or a biker who takes a cyclist who takes a hard fall, and emergency response services are called automatically on their behalf, and pretty powerful stuff. Yesterday at Apple's press release, the company announced its Apple Watch 6 will include a new sensor that is cleared to detect blood oxygen level, which we know is a key vital sign in the monitoring of COVID-19, as well as other respiratory illnesses and conditions like asthma and COPD. Others, of course, Withings has its smartwatch that's waiting on FDA approval for ECG detection. Omron has a smartwatch with an inflatable inner band that detects blood pressure. And so these use cases really expand our imagination of connected health beyond, let's say, video-only consultation visits or provision devices for niche patient populations to that active monitoring of health and wellness or safety use cases. And that proactive wellness monitoring and emergency response is where we see the most movement from those in the smart home, home services, and home automation market today, specifically for older consumers. So using a variety of approaches, whether it be home sensor-based platforms to detect activities of daily living, pendants, emergency assistant pendants and watches and other wearable form factors, TVs, tablets, even voice assistants. Companies like GrandCare, Alarm.com, Independa, Virtual Electronic Caregiver are helping seniors to stay in their homes longer and helping family and professional caregivers proactively monitor their well-being and their safety. So whether the residence is a personal home or a senior living facility, smart home tech, we see offers operational benefits to healthcare providers. And we're really going to explore the opportunities at these points of integration today, the benefits of partnerships between healthcare providers, players in the traditional healthcare ecosystem, and the home services and consumer tech space. So with that, our next speaker today is Mark Francis. He's the Chief Digital Health Integration Officer at Electronic Caregiver. And if you give us just 1 minute, we're going to bring Mark on, and he's going to continue this conversation with what Electronic Caregiver is doing to serve seniors and caregivers at home. Okay, great. So we're back, and I'm so pleased to welcome Mark Francis, who's the Chief Digital Health Integration Officer at Electronic Caregiver. Mark, welcome. Thank you for being here today, and I'll let you take the floor.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was an incredible overview. Wow, you really were comprehensive in terms of what you shared. Thanks, everybody. I'm thrilled to have an opportunity to join you today and provide some insights in terms of the emerging market opportunity with the new connected health at home market. I've been fortunate to be on both sides of things, both the provider and the healthcare service side, as well as the consumer tech side as well. So that'll inform some of the things I'll have a chance to share today in terms of the exciting opportunities from this convergence that we see happening around us. Today, I was going to walk through these the 5 areas. Why now? Just another spin on some of the stuff that Jennifer shared earlier. Some of the greater trends and market drivers. What I consider really the 5 pillars of success needed in this new connected home, health at home market. Some recommendations, and then an opportunity to introduce you to some of the stuff we've been working on at Electronic Caregiver. Why now? It's really interesting because if you look at the one photo here, it's from a U.S. television show back in the 1960s called The Jetsons. It talked about a future world. They were remarkably accurate in some areas in terms of talking about telecommuting, robots, telecommuting, and they also showcased early versions of telehealth as well. So the potential for the connected health at home market has enticed and been out there for decades. However, it wasn't really until COVID that this has really manifested itself to a reality. While COVID very well has been a black swan event for the emergence of this market opportunity, it's really important to understand that in the background, there had been a tremendous amount of work that had been done. The technology had been developed and tested. The infrastructure had been built out. The internet, cloud computing, 4G, 5G, all of that is now manifests itself to be available. Technology such as wearable computing, computer imaging, biosensing, augmented reality, virtual reality, again, are all things that had developed over the last few decades, which now have had an opportunity to come to the forefront in response to the pandemic and how that's impacted how care is being delivered. I think it's important to understand, though, that even before COVID, there was a whole tsunami of forces that were converging to transform this healthcare at home market, 4 of which I've laid out here. One is folks have heard the term of the age wave. Often that refers to the aging of the baby boom population. Well, you have now the cresting of the age wave because baby boomers are now approaching to be all over the age of 65. There's 55 million of them in the United States. Globally, it's over 700 million individuals. You also have a pandemic of chronic illness. In the United States alone, there's 133 million people with chronic illnesses, and 42% of the US population is obese. Traditionally, care at home was provided by informal friends and family caregivers. However, that system is being overwhelmed as well. Today, over 66 million Americans provide informal care at home. 1/3 of doctors are scheduled to retire within the next 5 years. So our infrastructure that we've relied on is starting to get stressed. And then on top of that, you have to look at the home. Well, there's been the proliferation of senior living communities. You have the nursing home industry. You have the continuing care retirement community. The reality is that 90% of seniors not only live at home, they want to remain living at home. Take it all together, there's a huge market, there's unquestioned need, there's a very, very target location. You know where these people are, they're at their home. But what's been holding things back? Part of it has been economics. Is there a payment market model in place? Until COVID, there really wasn't. It's not COVID itself, but the government response to COVID, with now the ability to directly reimburse providers for a whole array of different types of telecare services, that has changed the market. Jennifer talked about accelerating things by 5 years. I actually think it's accelerated things by decades, because now what's happened is because people cannot get to the clinic, all the potential of providing healthcare at home has been unleashed. And what has happened, as it's seen by this recent McKinsey report, this isn't a $100 million opportunity. This is a massive $250 billion opportunity. And now's an opportunity to capitalize on it. So how do we capitalize on it? When I look at it, I really look at it through the lens of there's really 5 pillars that need to be delivered on for us to capitalize on this opportunity and capture market share in this new connected health at home market. Part of what we need to do is shift our thinking. We need to start thinking about platforms, not products. We need to move beyond a collection of individual products to the seamless integration of technologies that are providing real value to the end user. We also had to move from having smart products in a smart home to intelligent products in an intelligent home. Technologies such as computer vision, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytics, predictive analytics, all integrated together are going to provide the type of insights that are going to help open up this market opportunity. We also have to move from products and platforms merely being usable to raise the bar to make them enchanting. We want your engagement with products to be fun and natural and easy to use. Some of the things we've seen through Alexa by using voice and using voice-driven interactions with products is a massive step forward. Add to that vision and start adding voices vision as a primary ways to interact with products, and you really start transforming not just how people use the products, but in healthcare, the level of engagement that you have. To drive outcomes in healthcare, you need to have engagement, and that means you need to create an infrastructure and a set of services that folks will go to on a daily basis to participate, have fun, and drive value. We also need to move from having data silos to data sharing. There's so many factors that impact health. There's so many players that can provide real value here that really to be able to have the impact and show the outcomes that we want, we need everybody to be able to have a shared infrastructure and a shared set of data that can be shared, distributed, and made interoperable. As folks from the tech center start working more with healthcare providers, you'll hear the word interoperability, HL7, FHIR. These are data standards that are needed to unlock the value of the data that's being captured. And this data can be all the way from what's considered in the past clinical data to data around what are now considered social determinants of health that have to do with housing, transportation, social isolation, food availability and security. It's now known that these social determinants make a major impact on health outcomes. And a lot of the providers of those services and the infrastructure to be able to enable that type of holistic approach to healthcare are folks that are not traditional healthcare providers. So related to that, we need to start thinking through the lens of partnership and not vendors. There's not one company that can do this alone. We need to build out an ecosystem, and we need to leverage core capabilities that everybody brings to the table to be able to accelerate the opportunity here and have impact together. What are some of my recommendations as we move forward? I kind of broke these down into kind of traditional recommendations. Jennifer touched on some of these as well. Critically important to get the foundation in place, as well as some things that might be more transformative. There's an opportunity to establish impactful cross-industry collaborations. Tech providers, last mile service providers, healthcare providers, community-based organizations coming together to focus on the need of this home-based consumer, can be transformative and make a huge impact. The companies that are traditionally involved in the health, the delivery of tech products, the service of consumers in that last mile, you have a unique opportunity here to own that last mile of the connected health at home market. Think of Geek Squad on steroids, focused upon the health and wellness needs of consumers. Think of wrapping around that a level of concierge service and support as well. The other thing that I recommend as well is a development and adoption of what I call an EMR Lite, an electronic medical record Lite, for the non-clinical entities to capture the full set of data needed to be able to look at needs and deliver services. That would be so critically important to establish a shared foundation of information, knowledge, data, and then services that can be recommended to act upon those insights. Beyond that, for quite some time in the healthcare world, there's been talk about the patient-centered medical home. I think we have a really opportunity here to look at that differently and look at the virtual consumer-centric health home. What is that model? Who are the participants? How is care coordinated and delivered? There's huge opportunities here to put a stake in the ground and really drive a new model of service delivery. Also, I challenge folks to rethink their business. Walmart, with being within, I think it's 10 miles of 90% of the population of the United States, has now opened up and is rolling out a series of clinics with Walmart Health brand. Again, rethink what you're doing. Think about what opportunities there are for you to add value to meet this unmet consumer need, given your infrastructure that exists physically and virtually. Also, from Airbnb transforming, hospitality, to Uber and Lyft transforming, transportation. There's massive shifts that are occurring in other segments of the economy. The same thing is going to happen. We are going to have a transformation from taxis to Uber in home-based healthcare. Think about that. What would it take for you or a collection of you and your partners to become the Uber for this market? The opportunity could be enormous. Here at Electronic Caregiver, for the last decade, we've been looking at these issues. We've been working to transform how we deliver care as well by really building out a patented platform as a service that enables us to provide virtual care, remote care management, care coordination, chronic care support, and we're adding on top of that a 3D virtual caregiver that we call Addison. Addison, we believe, will be transformative. She'll have the opportunity to be with somebody across all care settings, whether it's in the doctor's office, the hospital, the clinic, or at home. And at home, she'll be the only continuity of caregiver across the continuity of care that exists. It's that type of innovation that we believe is going to unlock the potential of these markets. And we'd love to work with anybody who's interested in partnering with us. Again, the future is now to unlock the potential for the connected health at home market. I thank you for the opportunity to share some insights with you and look forward to joining you for the rest of the day and the discussions to follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate it. Your insights, especially some really practical advice and guidance on owning the last mile and the idea of EMR Lite. I love that. We have time for just one question before we have to move on to the panel. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what your organization has gone through and maybe how you've seen needs change from the people that you're serving, whether it be the seniors or their family caregivers, during this pretty unprecedented time where we know seniors in particular have been impacted. They're at higher risk, of course, for poor outcomes from COVID-19 and that social isolation. that's really been the social precautions that have really been necessary, place a whole lot more burden on caregivers and maybe lead to additional social isolation. So I'd really love to hear from your perspective, kind of what you're seeing and how things have changed for you this year.
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, for us, we've been fortunate that we were not started in the last 18 months. We've been around for a decade, and as a result, we built out a very robust infrastructure and a suite of products to help deliver support and care for folks at home. What we saw this year is the demand for this type of technology went from a nice to have, I'll try it, I'll pilot it, to a absolute must have. Because once folks were no longer able to go into a traditional healthcare setting, care needed to be delivered to people where they are and where people are at the home. What we saw is an acknowledgement that telemedicine is more than virtual visits. Replacing a episodic in-person visit with an episodic virtual visit is not going to get the job done. You need to provide daily remote patient monitoring. You need to provide continual chronic care management. You need to provide transitional support. We have an infrastructure that enables our provider partners to provide that, get that information, and be proactive and predictive in terms of the care that they're providing for their patients and their clients. What we also saw, just like everybody else, is because of COVID, folks couldn't go into a facility or they couldn't go into home. We developed some pretty interesting COVID-related services as well that enable you to pre-screen a caregiver, professional staff, and the care recipient before people engage. Imagine it kind of as a TSA pre-check, and then you can make sure everyone is safe before they go in to have that inpatient engagement, in-person engagement. Again, whether or not that was going into facility, going into work, going into someone's home, and that has been tremendous. We actually had that adopted, ironically, at first by the Austrian Bundesliga, which is the professional soccer league over in Austria, as they were looking to restart. And they used that to be able to kick off and complete their season after they had paused. We also now have both employers, universities, and now some healthcare partners using that as well to be able to get back to business, back to work, and back to play. We think we'll see more of that.
Yeah, it's incredible the amount of changes and new components that need to be thought of now in new ways. It sounds like you guys are really responding to that. Mark, thank you so much. We need to move on to our panel, but thank you for your time and for your insights, and hopefully you'll be able to join us during the Zoom networking discussion breakouts. So with that, let me welcome our panelists to join me. Give us just 1 second and we'll bring those folks in.
Our latest research shows that between Q1 2019 and Q1 2020, intention to purchase a smartwatch rose from 13% of US broadband households to 20%. Over the past several years, we've seen innovations in technology that have ignited the imaginations of many, with consumer wellness devices increasingly encroaching into the medical space by monitoring an increasing number of vital signs. The most notable additions to date include high and low heart rate notifications, EKG detection of abnormal heart rhythms, and blood pressure monitoring. With an ongoing pandemic situation, the ability to track these metrics and be notified in the case of abnormalities may be extremely valuable to many. Tech giants in the consumer space are also beginning to make inroads into the medical market. COVID-19 has accelerated many emerging solutions in the healthcare space, especially use and familiarity of telehealth services. We anticipate increased use of medical devices in the short and near term, ultimately leading towards long-term increased usage. As consumers integrate connected devices and services ever more deeply into their lifestyle, they bring the same expectation and desire to their health and well-being. We anticipate more changes to come in 2020 as consumers adapt to being at home more, consider new ways to exercise as a result of limited gym time, and pay closer attention to medical issues. Thank you for joining us to learn more.
Great, thank you. So let's go ahead and dive into our panel discussion focused on consumer-centric healthcare and home services. We have a great group of speakers, industry leaders from a variety of different organizations. And I'm going to ask each of them to start with an introduction of themselves and their organization before we dive into the questions. So first up, I'd like to introduce Mike Bram, who's the SVP and GM of Trapalo. Hi, Mike.
Hey there, how are you today?
Great, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. You know, it really want to give compliments to the first two speakers, especially what we were just hearing from Mark. There's so many neat things that are happening, and how fast they're all happening in the marketplace is really exciting. And for us here at Cox and Trapalo, Trapalo is an organization that's been around also for a decade. We've really been working with the largest insurance companies and the largest healthcare organizations, many which I would say are early adopters, in working with remote patient monitoring and telehealth. And in that regard, our real focus has been on that chronic ill patient. So really working with the folks that have COPD or congestive heart failure, or even those that are having diabetes. And in that, what we're providing is end-to-end kind of services where we're providing the communications platform, the care platform, as you might say, the devices, and we also specialize really on one of the challenging areas with how do you get things in and out of a home, and be able to then repeat that and scale large programs. So for the last couple of years, as Trapalo, again, started a decade ago, Cox purchased Trapalo 5 years ago. We've also, as an organization, been focusing on Cox and their home life and home life care solution set, and that from the smart home, as well as creating some devices and some systems now that can aid seniors, especially in this time. And so that as we're looking at how can we develop and deliver services, we're continuing on with this, also now providing different aspects of the market through Simply MD, which was just announced this week. And that platform really allows for smaller healthcare providers, specifically like small physician groups, to be able to also take advantage of telehealth, as that relationship with the consumer/patient is so important. And then where really Trapalo and Home Life and everything that's coming together is how can we provide those solution sets so that we're very much involved with things that are, again, it's prescribed in the facility or the healthcare facility, but it's delivered in the home. And in that regard, we've seen tremendous growth, especially during COVID, and focusing on things like hospital and home and other type of scenarios, which hopefully we get a chance to talk about later.
Great, we sure will. Thank you so much, Mike, for that introduction and for participating in our discussion today.
Sure.
Next up, we have Manish Goyal, who's the Vice Chair for Corporate Development at Mayo Clinic Platform with the Mayo Clinic. Manish, please, great to see you. Thanks for joining us. And if you could introduce yourself and Mayo Clinic and your work there.
Sure. So Mayo's pretty well-known brand, so I won't spend too much time. 150-year-old complex care organization delivering care to hundreds and thousands of folks every year. You know, the sickest of sick. Again, rated #1 for multiple years now. So 2 years ago, Mayo started this journey around how Mayo got here over the last 150 years with a team-based care approach is not really how Mayo is going to persist for another 150 years. So how do we make sure that it is continuously reinventing itself? And so 2 different initiatives were started. One was the creation of Mayo Clinic International, which is the expansion of our footprint from the 3 sites in the US to overseas as well. And so now we have sites in the Middle East as well as in Europe, and certainly expanding. The second one, which is what I'm part of, is Mayo Clinic Platform. So what you see on the screen is really a representation, both technical and business, on how we think about the world. 3 key components of our platform strategy are creating insights from data that is flowing through the system that can be beneficial to healthcare providers and biopharma, et cetera. Second is changing the mechanism of how you actually get data into the core system. So that's remote diagnostics and management. Can we remove the hurdles that exist in the system of disparate data sources, in, complex formats, incoherent silos of data? And then finally, what we're talking about today, virtual care. Can we change the site of care that makes it easier, changes the model? So if you think about health systems, they're high fixed cost structures. Can we actually upend that and make them variable cost structures? So we'll talk a little bit about that today. All of this is leveraging Mayo's brand, Mayo's intellectual horsepower. The way we describe ourselves is we're this little startup inside of Mayo that's hoping to change how Mayo operates, and then at the same time provide services to other health systems. And my role specifically is to provide strategy, corporate development, so build by partner activities. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Manish. That's really helpful in understanding exactly what you're doing within the larger Mayo organization, right? So thanks so much, and looking forward to your insights. Next, we have Girish Kumar, who's the CTO of Gadgeon. Girish, if you could tell us a little bit about your company and what you're focused on.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. So yeah, Gadgeon is a service provider. We develop technologies for other solution companies who are giving actual solutions to the customer. So Gadgeon is an IoT solution provider where we have developed many solutions for both home automation segment as well as healthcare markets for the last 8-9 years. And recently, we got into the remote patient monitoring probably like 4 or 5 years back. We have been developing solutions based on this remote patient monitoring, to get ECG or say other vital parameters like SpO2 or those kind of things from body wearable parts, and get it across to the cloud via some kind of gateways like your mobile phone or home gateways or things like that. And once it is got into the gateways, once it goes into the cloud, we have developed solutions which can provide easy insights to the doctors or the technicians who are analyzing those data in real time, and alert the right person at the right point of time. And in response to COVID, we have developed a continuous monitoring system which can collect ECG, SpO2, the other vitals like temperature and respiration rate, and push it across to the cloud platform where a small analytics engine runs and highlight if the patient is going to go bad or things like that. So this live monitoring system can also monitor people at home and take their vitals after, say, operation or those kind of things. So Gadgeon has been developing these kind of RPM solutions in various segments, various critical care areas, and providing it for customers out there. So that's the brief on Gadgeon.
Okay, Girish, thank you very much for your introduction and for joining the discussion today. Next, we have Carrie Palacanis, who is the Executive Director of Connect Care Operations at Intermountain Healthcare. Carrie, welcome. Thank you so much for being here, and tell us a little bit about your role at Intermountain Healthcare.
Thanks for having me. I am the, as you mentioned, Executive Director for Connect Care Operations, and I actually cover the direct-to-consumer market for our telehealth operations. We have a large integrated health system at Intermountain. We cover an 8-state region with telehealth services, and we have our own insurance product as well, which is what makes us an integrated health system. But we feature in our, we actually have a virtual hospital, and from that virtual hospital, we leverage our programs. I have responsibility over our largest urgent care in our market, which is a virtual urgent care. We're in the process of standing up virtual behavioral health services, virtual primary care, I have a large remote patient monitoring platform and program that we leverage across our system, both in primary care and specialty services, as well as scheduled video visits, or what we traditionally call telehealth visits, from our providers directly to consumers in their home or other environments. And then we have I have a counterpart who covers our acute care services, which is basically the hospital to hospital or provider to provider. But for the most part, if it goes direct to consumer, then I oversee the operations and integration of that into our health system.
For joining as well. So let's go ahead and kick off here. Before I do, Girish, we're having a little hard time hearing you. So if you're able to turn up your microphone at all or just speak louder, I think we'll be able to hear your insights. But really for the whole team, I'd love to start off with understanding from your perspective in the ecosystem, how are you thinking differently about caring for consumers at home this year than say, this time last year? And maybe we can start off with Carrie.
Wow, that's a great question. The answer is I haven't been thinking about it differently, but COVID changed the way we needed to respond. Being that I focus on the direct-to-consumer market, it's been the same, but COVID caused a vast change in the way we operate through our telehealth department. We had a 300% increase in telehealth visits with a subsequent decrease in in-person visits. And my urgent care, which has been doing a 50% year-on-year increase, actually went up to about a 400% increase during the surge of COVID. So I think the main thought that I've had is how can we more rapidly respond to the needs of the patients, utilizing and leveraging telehealth?
Yeah, absolutely. The ability for care organizations to respond in the way that they've had and scale up operations, obviously, pretty big challenge operationally, I imagine. Did you see much difference in the type of visits that were coming to you, or change in anything?
I think the largest change that I saw was actually at the provider level, because we had some reticence at the provider level wanting to do video visits and seeing them as not as equivalent to an in-person visit. And then once the patients stopped showing up at the offices, that perspective changed radically. And so I've been working in telehealth for 15 years. And so I feel like I've been preaching to the choir amongst my telehealth colleagues, but it's been a very hard uphill push with some providers to get them to understand that this change is happening whether you want it or not. So you either hop on the train and be part of it, or you're going to be left behind at the station. And so COVID really helped to illustrate that.
Yeah, it's so powerful. We see the same from the consumer side, from our own research, that there was such a strong bias towards in-person care, that the quality of care that you can receive virtually cannot possibly match what you get in person, right? And so big shift in mindset on both the consumer and the care provider side.
Yeah, and I think a much more willing acceptance to connected care devices that weren't there previously, which is one of the reasons I find this discussion exciting, because the smart home is the logical next place and hub for community-based care.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me ask Girish as well, if you can chime in here about how you're thinking differently now about care at home this year. And I think that you were mentioning it in your opening statements that you guys actually added some new features during this pandemic. If you could.
Hopefully I'm audible now. So as I mentioned, we have developed a solution for COVID where we can monitor people or patients or potential patients and get their ECG or SpO2 live. Now the problem with these kind of things is, like earlier, Mark was mentioning the number of doctors who are going to retire is going to be 1/3 of the population, and what they were all handling people inside the hospital. Now with this home care coming in, a lot of data is going to come in, and that the potential amount of data that is going to come in is very high. And with these kind of monitoring, that continuous monitoring that is going to happen from home, nobody can monitor it in without some kind of intelligence. And that is where we are changing our direction or accelerating our thing. we had all these kind of variables which can collect the data, which can push the various vital parameters easily into the cloud and all that. But analytics is what was not picked up or not in action yet. So that is where we had, so some of our solution has been in the market for last 2 years and have collected a lot of ECG kind of data from a lot of real patients. And so these kind of data has been available with us with a lot of arrhythmias and all those being marked by technicians. So right now we have changed it to include analytics so that we can scale up faster and provide the solution. So scaling up of these solutions to the end customer, the backend system which provides these kind of intelligent inputs to the caregiver. So say this person is going to go bad, or there are some alerts coming in for this particular person. Those kind of intelligent alerts has to be given, and that is where analytics is going to give a good boost. And our team has been putting together a lot of thing in that, and our ECG-based analytics solution, which can predict arrhythmias or not predict, actually detect arrhythmias in the data, is coming up really good. So that kind of changes what we are seeing right now. And to add to that, the second kind of thing, that since it's in home monitoring, invasive monitoring is not what people prefer in home. So whatever non-invasive techniques are there, that is what people would prefer at home. And that is also another area that we are all working in. So for example, when you have elders walking around, or you want to detect activities of your elders, asking them to use a wearable is not that easy. They may forget to wear it, or they may not charge it properly. So non-invasive monitoring of people either using computer vision or wireless sensing, those kind of things is what another area that we are accelerating our programs.
Okay, great, thanks. Mike, let me bring you in as well. You guys have been on market with Trapalo for over 10 years, I think you mentioned. And so you've really seen the development of this market over all of that time. There's been a lot of change in the past decade, none more so than in the past year. So how have your operations changed, or how are you thinking differently about serving your customers at home?
Sure, thank you. That old expression of being lucky is the intersection of opportunity and preparation. For us doing this for the last 10 years, one of the things we've had an opportunity specifically in the last year was we were developing with one of, they call them IDNs, integrated delivery networks, how they might do a hospital at home solution. We were doing that last fall, and we're operationalizing that, where many organizations were trying to figure out, how could we essentially improve on the quadruple aim, which is helping to have a better overall opportunity of saving money, delivering better outcomes, and improving the patient engagement and better utilizing clinicians. We were already operationalizing that and scaling, and that's one of the key that we're looking at right now, is that as we've seen many of the barriers, and as we've already heard, many of us have been essentially evangelists for a number of years. What we really saw in the first 5 weeks of COVID were things that many of us thought were going to be at least 5 years in regulatory and other changes. So for us, what we've been able to do is work with our customers and with new folks as well to figure out how can we provide these solutions, which really is taking an advantage of all of the FDA devices to be able to look and see what might be new sensors and the active daily living type of sensors that are specifically in a smart home. How do we pull all those together and put it through a system, essentially, as you've heard some of the others, which would transform data into actionable information. And that's one of those really critical areas, to where one single monitor or one single device doesn't necessarily help. It's in the context of all of these different things, so that we can then improve outcomes and to be able to scale to really address what really are tens and if not hundreds of thousands of patients that need these solutions. And the thing which we've been preparing and doing for a number of years is working with that exact population which has those compromised systems. So again, on congestive heart failure, COPD, and for diabetes are our big population health focuses. And so we are already working with that population, which is the most vulnerable during COVID. And all of these things have come together where we've really been able to, I think, provide impact here over the last 6 months of COVID.
So, Mike, you used a term that we're hearing more often now, hospital at home.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear you expand a little bit about what you mean by that term and
Sure.
maybe how different than remote patient monitoring and telehealth. Is it underneath the larger umbrella? How should we be thinking about that? It's really come to the forefront of use cases with
Sure.
COVID-19. So how are you thinking about that?
I see remote patient monitoring typically has been where we're trying to monitor different vital signs to see whether or not someone is improving or is declining in their health. That's more of from a chronic care, that is a long-term continuum, or most, organizations that have used remote patient monitoring have focused it on avoiding readmission penalties and other things. Hospital at home is specifically designed to where someone checks into the hospital, they're fully admitted, but it might be the certain disease states, and I don't want to generalize, but let's just call them the itises. So it could be things like, diverticulitis, or it could be a host of other type of the diseases that they're managing and would normally have been in the hospital during that treatment. But what they're doing is they're presenting into either the emergency department or being admitted in other areas and immediately sent home, still fully admitted, to where they then bring in the solutions from the technology that can monitor. They would then have someone actively enter the home if they have to do IV care or other things. But it's tremendous advantage because it's a better patient experience. Don't have to worry about secondary infections. We're also looking at a cost, which some of our providers are looking at greater than 40% cost savings, so that we're able to transfer the cost, have a better outcome, and then to be able to get that equipment and that monitoring environment in and out in a pretty quick time frame. And that's been one of our solutions, that we've been able to provide the full system, including the logistics, which quite honestly is no small challenge, to be able to get in and out of a home at a time to which they would be admitted. Hope that helps.
Absolutely. No, there's so many good questions that raises, and we'll definitely get back to the hospital at home idea. But I do want to bring Manish in here to talk about, your perspective from Mayo Clinic platform. What has changed in the past year, and maybe what use cases are you seeing come to the forefront for connected health that maybe weren't either on your radar or were lower priorities before in this market?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'd say that not much has changed from use cases. I'd say you've had acceleration. At the end of the day, this whole virtual care market, if you look at it, consumers have been ready for some time. So I think the consumer demand is absolutely there. It's primarily been a business demand. So is there a demand from the providers of healthcare services, which ultimately leads to, is there a business model for those services? So I'd say those things in conjunction with regulatory frameworks not being there has been the holdback. And so with COVID, if there's any silver lining, it's that some of those regulatory frameworks have been eased. So when Mayo Clinic platform, when we decided on what were the markets we were going to attach to within virtual care, it was our CEO, Dr. Gianrico Perugia, who said home hospital, this was 2 years ago, is a bet. It's a long-term bet, but we're going to attach to it. And we're not just going to attach to lower acuity, severity 1 or 2 type illnesses. We want to treat the most sick of sick patients in the home, because if we can solve it for that segment of the population, then you actually can move down market. It's very difficult to start with a low acuity patient and build up a set of services and technology on a phone. So our approach on the acute care side has been, can we care for severity level 2, 3, and 4 patients in the home? So as of this day, we've now, with our partner Medically Home, have cared for almost 1,000 patients in the home over the last year and a half. And if you look at that over the last decade, that's an order of 2 magnitudes more. And so COVID has accelerated the market. And what the results are 20 to 30% lower cost, patient on score traditional metrics being 20 to 30% higher. And more importantly, it changes the entire hospital system market. So we see every day hospital systems, especially in rural markets, closing because they can't support volume. And that's because they all have large fixed costs. So the business model solve here is you don't need to have big fixed costs. You can have a variable cost structure with a set of suppliers that are at the ready, but that aren't sitting and waiting for patients to come into the home, into the hospital. I think the only other end of the spectrum, so we've approached it with that as our acute care strategy. On the primary care strategy, it is around how do you actually compress the transactional things that patients have to go through. So if you think about simple things like UTIs, influenza, vaccinations, etc., it requires a doctor visit, a laboratory visit, and sometimes a follow-up. Can we actually compress that into a telemedicine plus diagnostic, deliver it into the home? Mm-hmm. And just by changing that, you take a lot of the patient issues out, you take the cost out of the system, but you've now enabled faster resolution to what is next, what is the follow-on care. So our approach is, can we solve the high acuity problem, and then the primary care problem? Everything in the middle solves itself if you get these two ends right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me about how you're thinking about that. But this huge shift in model raises so many questions operationally about how you achieve this, right? How are you thinking about, or maybe you're already doing this, right? And so maybe some lessons learned as to, where the ecosystem really needs to mature, as to, let's say, getting devices into consumers' homes, getting them set up. If there is a problem, who supports that? Just operationally, how you manage this caring of consumers with high acuity needs at home. Is there anything that you can share there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Ultimately, I don't think it's a technology problem. And I think the technology in this space is mostly just about integration and having the right set of partners that are delivering it. I think the challenge is going to be around the services, as you alluded to it. I think there's an opportunity to create a new service line that is the intersection of care delivered in the home, but also some level of technology support. So we're looking at that, and we're looking, possible partnerships. I'm sure you and the viewers or are aware of things like the 3 initiative around community paramedicine. So instead of paramedics coming in, stabilizing the patient, delivering them, transporting them into the hospital, can you actually care for them in the home? So one of the programs that we've launched in Boston is actually, instead of transporting them into the home, can we actually care for them? And why that's important is you actually reduce the load on the hospital system when you do that. But that requires a completely retraining of these paramedics from being stabilizers to actually delivering care on a 24/7 model. And where technology comes in is you need a physician tethered to that paramedic to attach to the things that only a physician can do. I'd say those are the areas that we see most need for. Again, technology, I'd say the gap is going to be, in the US, is going to be a connectivity. So if you don't have hardline connectivity, DSL or cable modem or satellite or cellular that is reliable to the 5 nines level, then it's really hard to deliver complex acute care in the home reliably.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know that Carrie wanted to jump in on this conversation as well. So Carrie, I'd love to have your thoughts on hospital at home or other use cases that you're seeing, come to the forefront from your position at Intermountain Healthcare.
Yes, we, very similar to the previous discussions, we had been maturing out hospital at home prior to COVID, and COVID definitely put a push on the hospital at home market, as well as really using connected devices for acute situations, which in the past, the focus of connected devices was chronic disease management and chronic care. And so I saw evolve post-COVID was part of it coming from the change in reimbursement and availability of using devices in a non-chronic manner, that we were looking at these acute solutions. And so our hospital at home program focuses at two different levels. We focus on that patient at the emergency department level, identifying them as a patient who doesn't need to be admitted into the hospital, but needs hospital level monitoring and care in the home environment and coordinating those services. And then we also look at patients who are in the hospital, and can we move them out sooner to their home environment, again, utilizing the same type of monitoring and technology that we have in the hospital, but applying it in the home environment. And as previously been mentioned, one of the biggest barriers to the ability to move this quickly into the home market has been connectivity, especially in my population where we have a large rural and frontier population. Connectivity becomes that barrier that prevents that access to care, but wherever and whenever we can, and again, in a smart home environment, the ability to make that connection is the most difficult barrier. Once we have that met, then it's about just coordinating services.
Mm-hmm. We are getting a question from our attendees, from our audience as well, really on that point, right? So not everybody has reliable connectivity, and not everybody is a broadband user. Parks Associates data says that about 87% of households in the United States have broadband access, but it may a growing portion actually are mobile only. They're relying on their smartphones or their tablets, and they might not have a fixed line. So how do you think about serving those populations, whether it be perhaps embedded cellular hubs, fixed wireless to the home? I'm sure you've thought through these same types of issues. And so do you have anything that you're working on for the non-connected populations, and how do we close that gap?
Absolutely. It's a great question, because as I said, so much and my background is predominantly in rural and underserved regions. So connectivity's always been an issue. And if I look at the evolution of what I've done with telehealth in the last 15 years, when we first started out, it was all about broadband, it was all about bandwidth. And now more and more we look at cellular enabled technology, because that is frequently available in areas where we don't have broadband technology. The other thing that comes into play and becomes a little difficult for patients, especially the older population, is if you rely on web-enabled technology or broadband technology, then they need to know their password in order to make the connectivity to devices. And so really, when you're looking at device deployment into a home environment, it's about how easy is it for that patient to utilize the devices, and how simple is it for them to get online with their providers and provide that connectivity. And so we look more and more at platforms and devices that have a really low level of connectivity need, both in bandwidth as well as in user friendliness, I guess I would say, because that's really where the difficulties lie. I haven't experienced a lot of pushback from my older population, mostly because we look at that as we're starting up a program. We're trying to find something that has a reduction of barriers in usability as much as possible. And then we see that when we present patients with easy to use devices, they, regardless of their age, regardless of their connectivity, they'll find a way to make it happen.
Yeah, that's really interesting feedback. We actually saw in our survey data this year that asking older consumers who had tried a telehealth experience in the past year about their satisfaction with a bunch of different quality factors, and they actually rated everything higher than younger consumers. And it may have been, we expect that it's a matter of low expectations, right? That they thought it was going to be terrible. And so we've exceeded their expectations. But again, that is among households with broadband internet already.
Yeah, and I mean, my 85-year-old mother, she does FaceTime with her great grandchildren and her grandchildren. And I think, we tend to have a misperception about the elderly population and their ability to use connected devices. As long as we make it simple, they will use it. And they're actually very, very strong advocates and proponents of connectivity.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me go back to Mike here. So Trapal is so unique in the sense that you have this care services, connected care service business, but you're part of Cox, of course, communications with internet service and a home security play and pay TV, right? So you kind of see all angles of this ecosystem. Can you talk to where a company like Cox that's in the smart home and the connected home space can really, play well here? And we heard some perhaps needs on the connectivity side, needs on maybe tech support and provisioning devices into the home. What are you seeing as opportunities there?
Sure, and I think we've seen the acceleration of all of those requirements during COVID, especially from a scale perspective. Cox has their smart home environment, their home life care, and their home life as a smart home, and then home life care being an adjunct part of that. We also, as Trapalo, we're all cellular. And what we're doing is a both and. So where we can leverage that broadband solution, we do that. And where we can and where we need to is to serve patients really all across the United States. So Trapalo, we're not limited by the restrictions of a franchise for where they might have broadband provided by one of the MSOs. We truly go all across the United States. Where this is so important right now is where we are in America and really talking about and dealing with the disparity of care. What we're able to show with essentially the access to wireless is that we're able to really better address the rural and urban underserved communities. And so as we heard from Carrie and as we also heard from our folks at Mayo, it's really trying to be more inclusive of who we can include into these services, and connectivity is an issue. So for us, using a both and strategy, really, this is where we think we can complement the best of the individual, or I should say more of the unique qualities around broadband and the cellular, any of the wireless environments. And for us, the distribution of these devices, it's important because what we've been able to do, and it's kind of unique. I like to say that our organization, maybe each and every day, we're unique in that we can say we're providing love. Because what we're able to do is dealing with a call center environment that we've created, is to deal with the technology and other issues that especially some of the seniors who are also the sickest of the sick, that, if they're having that congestive heart failure or other comorbidities, we're able to provide that solution in a way that we're saying we have to talk in a certain way with a certain level of patience. And the other thing which we really have to understand as a community and as a country is that we're not just really talking any longer about the physical health. It's the total health. So right now, what we're seeing through loneliness and others is that the behavioral health is intimately involved with what some of their physical illnesses are. So I am proud to say that it might be that we're providing love in that environment as well, is in a kind and a compassionate way, work with an individual that has physical, maybe even loneliness and other type of behavioral issues. And by George, we're also trying to help them with the technology so that they can be better monitored by their caregiver, which is a family member oftentimes, maybe even remote, and or that direct caregiver through the clinicians that we've heard about earlier. So both and is how we're trying to tackle this.
Yeah, interesting. Well, we have gotten a ton of questions from attendees, so I want to make sure that we're incorporating those in our discussion as well. Before I do that, I do want to remind attendees that there are some polling questions in the polling tab, and so I'll be looking at those results in just a minute as well. One polling question asks about the top opportunities for care at home coming out of the COVID-19 crisis, and the other one focusing on what smart home service and product companies, where they can provide the most value in the connected health ecosystem. So we'll take a look at those results in just a minute. So a lot of different questions. One came up specifically around video quality. And this actually gets to bandwidth needs a little bit too. So I might come to Carrie. You had made a remark that where possible, you want to go with products or platforms that have the lowest bandwidth needs so as not to kind of overwhelm the system. At the same time, if you think about what we hear 5G is going to enable and the quality of video and the ability to, see different skin tones, and, there's a lot that's kind of being discussed on what can be done with an even higher level of video quality that's extraordinarily high bandwidth application, and being able to see the patient and the value that that brings. So can you talk a little bit about how you see those kind of two needs, and maybe there are different patients or different conditions that are being treated that require low bandwidth solutions versus something that requires video or a high bandwidth approach?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. If you asked me that question 15 years ago, I'd say it's super important that we have bandwidth. But the connected devices have changed so much. They're so effective at working in low connectivity environments that from a provider's perspective, it's not as important as it used to be. I think when you talk about video connectivity, ironically, the frustration levels that I get the most are from providers and patients on lag time with audio video. If they're having a conversation, they find it very frustrating if there's lag in audio video, not necessarily associated with can I apply my dermoscope or my ophthalmoscope to a patient. I remember the first time as a provider, this is probably about 10 years ago, that I had a dermoscope and I applied it in the environment with a patient, and I looked at it and I said, well, my goodness, everybody would look like they have cancer if I was looking at 1,000-time magnitude for a patient skin evaluation. So the technology devices are good. The connectivity becomes a barrier only in that frustration point of patients and providers having that same expectation that there wouldn't be those lags. But also, when you don't have options, it's amazing what people will accept. So it's very much dependent upon the environment that they're operating in. If it's an acute emergent or urgent situation, they're willing to take whatever. If it's more of a long-term or a nice-to-have situation, then you're going to have more frustration associated with those connectivity issues.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, so our next question, we got a question, and maybe I'll go to Garish for this, about the top, in your experience in the remote patient monitoring world and the data that you're capturing. You talked a lot about data earlier. What are the top 5 parameters or sensors that are required to ensure safe health monitoring at home? So what data are you really is most valuable to capture? And perhaps both from the consumer perspective, but really from the care provider perspective too, that they need access to.
Yeah, so that depends on the condition that the patient is in. So it could it could be just your blood pressure or your those kind of things for a normal person, but it could vary to somebody having a heart problem. It could mean having ECG, the respiration, all those parameters might become important for people with more problems. So it depends on the problem that you have, and that's where these kind of things comes in. Now, to get a meaningful insight into a problem, say for example, right now we have COVID. How do we detect if somebody is going to go bad or somebody's parameters is not good? So it is a combination of heart rate variability. It is the respiration rate can go bad in cases. So for some people, it could be the SpO2 that shows the symptoms first. So for these kind of, so depending on the situation, we have to take multiple data points and use them for analysis and combine all of them and predict something is not right. But if it is for a particular, say for a post-operative condition, say somebody had a heart surgery and they are in the recovery mode and they are in monitoring for say 1 month after their operation, it could be just the ECG parameters that you're looking at. So yeah, it depends on the condition.
Yeah, so when you think about that incredible variety of conditions that can be treated today and perhaps in the future will be treated, it sounds like as a vendor, you really have to be ready with different types of devices, different types of sensors in order to detect the data from what that particular patient and that condition requires. Let's go to our first polling question. So this was about the top opportunities for care. coming out of the COVID-19 crisis. And it looks like our attendees, just for our speakers, I don't know that they can see this, so I'm going to read this out to you. So the top opportunities coming out of the COVID-19 crisis for care at home. The number one answer, 40% said as needed telehealth consultations. The next one, 24% said healthy aging or independent living, and then followed by post-op, post-discharge monitoring, and then chronic condition management. So actually probably the leading use cases that we see today, kind of doubling down on those. Some other options we had put out there were behavioral mental health services, hospice, end-of-life care at home, and then also the concept of televigilance, which is more with schools and employers and colleges. I think somebody mentioned professional sports leagues, right? Being able to proactively monitor yourself for signs of illness before you can kind of do something else. So I'd love to come back to Manish. Does this align with how you're thinking? Again, as needed telehealth consultations, number one, healthy aging, independent living, number two.
Yeah, no, I think that for the broader market, that makes a lot of sense, because those transactional ways of engaging with the healthcare system are easier. Because of Mayo's focus on really complex care, we've been trying to tackle the more episodic things that are a little bit more difficult. And so, the types of conditions and use cases that we're seeing are infusion, chemotherapy or infusion in the home. Just one of my most touching stories that we've seen over the last month is a patient came in, needed infusion, and we put him into the home hospital program. He was very excited about it because his wife was also going through chemotherapy. So what was great about that is we could monitor him, deliver meals for not only him and his wife, but also his wife. So now we've got this situation where this technology is enabling a completely life-altering moment for a very hard situation for this patient. So as we think about any of these use cases, I think the thing that we're focused on is how do we make the home the primary or the initial or the default place for care. So with this home hospital, we're trying to figure out how we actually flip it so it's not, certain conditions go into the home. It's actually the default condition is to discharge the patient into the home, and then for certain conditions, you keep them in the hospital. It's that kind of sea change and mind change that's going to be necessary. And I don't know if I answered your question directly, but it's a very subtle but important shift if we want to make a change in the healthcare system.
I think it's a really powerful example. I think if anything else, this crisis has maybe exposed more of that personal social intelligence about what really needs to happen to treat people, and patient-centric meaning person-centric as opposed to a patient in front of me at the facility. So that's a really great example. We did have a question come in that I'm going to bring back to you, Manish, because you spoke to the economics around a hospital at home model. And I think one of these questions is maybe doubting these economics, right? Isn't it phenomenally expensive to treat somebody in the home and have all of these devices into the home? And you're saying, well, if you think about the cost structure of hospitals shifting dramatically, actually, it could be more cost efficient to deliver these services at the home instead. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And I imagine you may get skepticism on that from other places in the ecosystem, and help us understand that.
Yeah, no, when we went through this exercise, we said patient safety number one. So that checked off a box once we slowly rolled into these programs cautiously. Patient outcomes, are the patient outcomes better? Important. Provider satisfaction. So our providers really engaged with this approach because it's important. If they're not actually, they're the ones recommending this type of care. Is there a reimbursement pathway? So I'll address it this way. Reimbursement, as we know, is a very complex thing. So we need we worked with the larger health insurance companies in the country to figure out what the right approach is for a home hospital. Because if we see it as a completely different kind of care, then it's going to take a long time. But if we see it as an adjunct to the hospital, then I think we can actually evolve more quickly. And that's the approach we're taking. As it relates to government and CMS, that's a process, that's a multi-year process that we're on, and we're on a journey there. What I'll say to the skeptics are, we've now rolled out to 8 different health systems, ranging from critical care access hospitals, urban centers, to organizations like Mayo. The thing to remember is every single health system has a large fixed cost. They are maintaining a building, a set of employees, administrative staff, nursing staff, physicians. Those organizations have to keep at a high utilization. Otherwise, you're upside down in your economics. So what we're asking every health system to think about is, if you could actually reduce your physical infrastructure and not have as many beds, could you become more profitable? And that's a question that's happening at the CFO and CEO level at most health systems that are at 30, 40, 50% utilization. And COVID has exposed that business model problem in health system is, if you don't have high utilization, you're upside down economically. So when we do a side-by-side comparison, we're comparing it against a traditional hospital stay where it costs you several $1,000s to keep a patient overnight. Now, sending them home, devices are not that expensive. We've got 8 or 9 proof points that say otherwise.
Wonderful. Well, I'm really appreciative of your insight, and everybody, we've actually come to time. So thank you all so much for this discussion. We heard a lot about what the provider side is doing and the health plans are doing, and maybe some of the needs as we go forward, and also from the solution vendor side, right, what they're doing and partners in this larger ecosystem. So please join me in continuing the conversation or networking discussions. Our team should be, if they haven't already, our team should be posting the links to our Zoom rooms in the chat portion of your event platform, and we hope to continue the conversation there in just a minute. I also want to welcome you all to our next Connections community event, which is on October 7th, focusing specifically on support, onboarding, and ongoing services for the connected home generally, health being one vertical there, but of course there's a lot going on in the connected home and home automation space, and how can we've learned a lot about remote support this year. I know that those of you in the service provider space, not being able to access people's homes has really provided some disruptive thinking and new models there. So thank you all. Thank you to my panelists. Thank you to Mark from Electronic Caregiver, and to our sponsors and our supporters. And we'll see you in the networking discussions.